gotten through what would be considered very mildly rough patches, and no one got really sick. So I'm hopeful that that's the case. This virus is tricky. I can tell you from when I was working just up until last Saturday that we saw some extremely ill people, including some extremely ill young people. And where they came to us along the course of their illness was variable. Some had been on some of the medications that you hear about in the news, like hydroxychloroquine, and despite that, they came in an acute respiratory failure and had to be put on a ventilator. So anyway, that's kind of the personal gist of it. I'm hoping to get out of my self-induced guest bedroom home isolation soon, and and move on and get back to work. I was off for spring break, which was fortunate, so I haven't had to miss any of my scheduled shifts, and I'm scheduled to go back next week. We'll see what IU Health has to say about that. Their return to work policy has like all healthcare institutions, has been a bit in flux. No one knows for sure. No one wants to have anyone go back to work and reinfect the workforce. That the workforce is one of the great concerns about how we're going to get through this, not just locally or regionally, but also nationally. So, one of the very last things I want to do is get anybody else sick. So that's the personal side. I don't know professionally. I'll tell you that, Indiana, I don't know where the worst is coming, and I don't know how to sugarcoat that at all. It's going to get bad even in Indiana, compared to those big cities with population densities that are much greater than ours, and public transportation systems, and people just living on top of one another. We don't have that to that extent here, and I hope we take advantage of that. I felt like that our public officials did shut it down. I mean, I was very much of the persuasion that the school should shut down. And as hard as it is for people that are working, that, there's just no way around it. For as much technology, research, science, that's just phenomenal. The one thing we have right now is such a simplistic thing, which is just to physically stay apart from one another. And we cannot be in a hurry to get back together, which is an odd thing for Christians, right? I mean, I'm sure that talk about the struggle is real. We're past sermon series. I mean, this struggle is real, and anyway, it's phenomenal that the one real weapon in our arsenal, for lack of a better way to put it, is just things we can do together as a community, and the church plays a big role in community. So,
what you want to share anything about the family? Any more how Megan's reacting and the kids, and with Dad being sick, and that causing angst or?
Well, I posted I haven't said much publicly about this until last night. I felt a little bit of probing, maybe from the Holy Spirit, to speak a little more publicly. So on Facebook, and, the way that we've talked about this with our kids, we started, and it wasn't untruthful. Initially, the thought of this being a bad flu was pretty prevalent in, certainly the easy way to frame the discussion with them. And so in not wanting to cause any unnecessary fear, that's how we spoke with them about it, as the just having the TV on and their social media was, the amount of publicity toward it was pervasive. And but I'd say two things. I mean, just to answer your question, my youngest is 9, and when I told him on Monday that I had tested positive, he, got a little glassy-eyed, and later on, he just would say, it's kind of weird to have the coronavirus in our house, which it sounds a little, that's a little tear jerking to hear that from your 9-year-old. But that said, the fact that we have had this whatever we've had for the last 3 weeks, I didn't say this, but so Megan had some symptoms 3 weeks ago, my wife, and hers were the worst for a while, but they were at that time not typical of what coronavirus symptoms were thought to cause. And then my daughter later that week got a fever and some profound fatigue, but it only lasted a few days. And then my son did as well. So some respiratory infection went through our house about 3 weeks ago. I'm hopeful that it was the coronavirus, because they will have been exposed to it and their immune systems will have cleared it from them, and they should have developed antibody to it. So they should be protected going forward, which is reassuring. So when we had a confirmed, positive, we shared that with them. One, two is the disease caused by the coronavirus has proven time and time again, in the limited amount of time that we've been able to gather data on it, that it does not adversely affect particularly the under 20-year-old and under 10-year-old crowd. Rare exceptions, but I mean, remarkably, and I say thank God that it doesn't. Now the 20 to 45 to 50, which we, thought was maybe less immune to it, might not be as much so, but still the numbers look good for that group. And I think, the big number is the mortality number. So anyway, with regard to my wife and my kids, I think the kids are doing fine. Kids have remarkable ability to live in the day. A good lesson for me to learn anyway, that are, not so much worry about the future. And that's what they do. And they're bored just like, the other kids, although I have no sympathy. I mean, we had 3 channels on one TV, and competing with a mom that watched The Guiding Light. So the fact that we are so socially connected now via technology, as much as I couldn't stand it up until now, it's remarkable that how we can stay connected with one another. And I don't like the term social distancing personally. I like the thought of my brother-in-law had brought this to my attention from a study that was published in the Annals of Family Medicine that talks about physical distancing, but being socially connected. And there's no more important time in my lifetime for us to be socially connected with one another. So.
Well, I think you being here with us this morning is a real positive statement about the importance of staying connected, and your willingness to chat with 50 people through this amazing thing called technology it shows where we are. It shows what we can do. Now, just at the risk of embarrassing Dave and his family, many of you may know this, many of you may not. Megan is a nurse, and she was first on scene at the shooting a couple of years ago at Noblesville East School. And so we don't want to fall into hero worship here, but Megan and Dave are, they're pretty special people. When you say you're out on the front line, they are out there on the front line for us, and we appreciate them immensely and want to say thank you for that. Noble West, maybe? Was it Noble East or Noble West?
Yeah, it's West, Chuck.
West, okay. I'm sorry. I usually get those wrong. Given a 50-50 choice, I'd be wrong most of the time.
Yeah.
You want to move to the ER room? Tell us what you're experiencing there, what kind of situations are showing in. And sometime I'm particularly interested in the demographic that you're serving downtown there. In fact, you might tell us where you're working physically down there, and then the poverty component of that.
So work in Methodist downtown. It serves obviously the metropolitan Indianapolis area, but it also very much serves central Indiana and even the whole state, in that we're a level 1 trauma center, a level 1 cardiovascular surgery center, stroke center. And so we have a lot of air traffic that comes our way. Historically, one of the favorite parts of my job has been the people that I get to meet, brief as it is. It is one of the benefits of being in a teaching hospital. The residents, the learners, can handle 90+% of the medical issues that come up and are correct in the way they assess situations and treat patients. And I get to go in and just kind of talk to people a little bit about what's going on and how they're doing. And it's been a real blessing just to interact with, just a wide swath of life, at least for Indiana, with nationality, race, sexuality, poverty. And it's not just poor. There's some very wealthy people in the metropolitan Indianapolis area, but it's phenomenal to have one of them sitting next to a very much, tough situation person with poverty or substance abuse or mental illness or whatever. So we were operating at capacity for the last few years, where we would have patients waiting in the emergency department for a day, not days, but occasionally maybe 40 hours to get a bed in either our hospital at Methodist or University Hospital, which is considered the probably most tertiary medical center in the state. And hospitals would just be full. And it was extremely frustrating to work under those conditions. It has been remarkable to me, the most remarkable effort of how serious the medical community reacted to this. For them to cancel elective surgery, which is their lifeline of revenue, if cardiovascular problems and orthopedic problems are called service lines that generate revenue that makes it possible for hospitals to operate just the way healthcare is reimbursed. And that is shut down. And the fact that they did that, and then they have physically changed the ER. We have our urgent care, so our low acuity area has been converted to what we call the COVID cabana, and they put reverse flow in there, and it's an area that's isolated for medium acuity patients, and we've had that in operation for a couple of weeks. And then our critical care area in the ER, they're converting sections of that to reverse flow rooms where they have big spaces where they can put multiple patients on ventilators, and they're doing that. And now for the ER, I would say that even early on, we started to max out capacity in some of those areas. So patients that were labeled COVID suspicious got put into regular parts of the emergency department by necessity because there just wasn't any space. It's been a struggle with our personal protective equipment for the staff to feel comfortable taking care of folks. And I honestly believe that that's just a matter of the fact that we have limited supplies. No one is intentionally trying to withhold that kind of stuff from us. The communities have really tried to step up, and particularly with the mask. And I think that is fantastic, and it will be helpful. It is not the same kind of mask that we need to take care of the very high risk situations where the virus can be what they call aerosolized, so kind of put up into the air. You need a special kind of mask to not contaminate yourself. But the hospital has also converted whole floors that were designated as taking care of certain types of things and changed them into COVID units and COVID ICUs. And they're working everything you hear in the news about how to put more than one patient on a single ventilator. And the pulmonary docs and the ICU docs and their fellows have been working on engineering solutions to that. The workforce, there have been calls for, the physicians that aren't now working as much to redeploy to areas that is beyond their scope of practice and their comfort zone. People have stood up. People have answered the call with that, which has been really inspiring to see. So, I'm trying to think. I mean, we work as a team in the ER. It's the nurses by far are the most frontline of all the providers. They're in direct contact with patients the most. So, they give them a lot of credit for that. But our housekeeping staff goes into those rooms, they decontaminate them. That's got to be scary for them. The security guards have to go into rooms when people get a little out of hand. And we still have, the last critical care shift I worked, we still had 3 or 4 substance abuse patients that came in having overdosed. And sometimes those people get a little wild, and regarding the virus, a big struggle has been to identify who's contagious, because we know now that it's not just the people that are exhibiting the classic symptoms, but there have been multiple reports of someone that comes in being in an accident, they gets a CT scan of their chest, and that CT scan shows a pattern that is suspicious for COVID, even though the person didn't come in with any concerns related to that, but then they were found out to be positive. And early on, the staff wasn't thinking that they had to be appropriately inappropriate protective gear for someone like that, for COVID protective gear. That has been a change. Now every patient is presumed to be infectious, and we wear the almost every time wear at least a mask, and put a mask on the patient to try to prevent any spread of the virus within the hospital to other patients and to the healthcare workforce. We struggled with shortages. It's not just personal protective equipment and ventilators. We're running out of medicine. The medicine that you need to keep people sedated to be on the ventilator in IV form is running low. One of the antibiotics is azithromycin that has been used, not uncommonly, but not proven, is running low. Albuterol, very common medicine that people use for asthma, is running low.
Is that in the supply chain?
Some of those shortages go back before this became a problem, and for several years, certain drugs will come into shortages. I presume it's supply chain driven, just in the fact that some of them aren't very profitable for drug makers to make. So supplies get low. Just some of the medicine that we would like to use now for COVID has, as I said, historically, for at least for a little while, been on the low side.
There's a feature on the Zoom here. It's called chat. So you can write in a question. And I don't know if everyone's discovered that yet, but there's a question that came in here, Dave. And it appears that we have a 15-year-old boy that plays basketball at the Boys and Girls Club with your son. Does that make sense? And he said he played up until 3 weeks ago. And his question is, should he have a concern in that he played basketball as a 15-year-old up to 3 weeks ago? And he was on your team.
I don't think so. I don't think so. I can't say for sure. If it's that question is specifically addressed to his exposure to my son, and this has been in our family, I hope not. That when you are exposed to when you start exhibiting symptoms, it's thought to be an average of 5-ish days. As far as I know, my family cut off, went into quarantine-ish type measures, um, particularly the kids before any of that, before they started having anything. Uh, so, if it's for that, just in general, if it's exposed, you were in any kind of situation where there's been a lot of people, um, if you haven't had symptoms by now, you're probably fine. And if you shut it down a couple of weeks ago, the average incubation period is thought to be about 5-ish days, although it can go up to a few weeks. So most people would have started to develop symptoms. Now there's this question of being asymptomatic, and if a young person never develops symptoms, but how infectious were they? And could they have spread it on to someone who's more at risk, like an elderly person or someone who's got medical problems? The answer is yes, they could. But the way this virus seems to spread mostly is by people that have it either coughing or sneezing or picking their nose or putting their hands in their mouth, and then either touching a surface or being in too close proximity to someone. So it's hard to imagine that a big degree of transmission from asymptomatic people that are, not that close to somebody else, and particularly if they're not picking their nose and wiping it on stuff. So
He's
that's
probably
okay.
Talk to us a little bit about how does your faith carry you through this? Not only this, but your faith walk every day that you are at work is put to test, because you're seeing the world from a totally different perspective than most of us do, and you deal with different issues. So can you share with us a little bit about your faith journey, not only with the virus, but just in general as an ER physician, and how that works out?
Sure. But to be honest with you, I don't know. I mean, I think it'd be exceedingly difficult to be a physician and dealing with people in crisis situations and having to talk to them about it if you're not a Christian and have a faith in something, a God that's just bigger and looking out for us. I'll say that going back into my training, with the instances that most come to mind to me is the delivering bad news thing, and just personally trying to digest bad news that happens to people, particularly young people, I guess. But we would have people come in on our trauma service that had horrible things happen to them. Either they were killed or paralyzed or permanently brain damaged. And, having to talk to their families about that, not knowing them at all, was something that has always stood out to me. And seeing how badly, to be honest, a lot of doctors do that, and somewhat out of necessity of building up a great big callus to try to handle it emotionally and personally. But I have wanted to stay soft in a certain way, to be sensitive to that kind of just human tragedy, and understand that you're going to be involved with some of the worst things that people ever experience it on that said, in this weird paradoxical way of being on a very superficial level, and that my encounter with them maybe 10 minutes, but yet such a profoundly, a profound issue that they're going to be dealing with, for them. So I have tried to integrate my faith in I'm not much of an evangelist, to be honest with you, at work. And getting back to the experience, I just very much appreciate my ability to interact with a wide variety of people, and that God has really opened my eyes to the plights of a lot of folks, some of their own doing, but some not. And then particular to COVID, again, I get back to this idea with all the tools we typically have in our toolbox to deal with healthcare problems, and there are many. Um, the one we have right now is this being physically apart tool. So, there is a lot of underlying angst, I think, um, stress. I'm not sure. I mean, we deal with that a lot, but there's a sort of maybe a cloud of it is a better way to say it, that hangs over the ED in the hospital now with folks, and but people for the most part try to stay positive. There's a lot of we can't be physically separate, so we are together. It's hard not to want to give a high five or a leg kick or an elbow, whatever, even a hug, and you just know you can. And particularly when you're in these really stressful situations, and you know that that it is gnawing at people in the background. So just the scripture that I've been looking at, again, basic stuff, but it's about encouraging one another toward love and good deeds in Hebrews, and to continue meeting together as your Bible study is doing despite the physical distancing. That's been something I've been um, just, I guess, meditating on a little bit, and then just being patient and affection in Romans 12. Romans 12 has always been a meaningful. I've never heard God speak to me personally in a overt way, but if there was ever scripture that seemed to jump out at me, Romans 12 has got to be there, going back 25 years. So um,
My caregiver has jumped in here with a question, if you don't mind.
sure.
Hi, Dave. Hi, Dave.
Vivian. Hi, Vivian.
Hi. You are speaking to the older generation here that's
Yeah.
supposedly at risk. And I think most of
Right.
us are doing the social distancing and Lysoling and wipes and things like that. I guess my question is there more that we can do, or what kind of a percentage is it that keeps us from getting it if we do these things? Or what is the percentage of us being at risk?
I don't have a concrete answer, Vivian, to say if you took 100 people 100 people over 60 that are all doing the appropriate social or physical distancing measures, how many would even with that or despite that still get infected? I mean, the only way they can get it is exposure to the virus. So probably the only exposure they're getting, even with social distancing, is coming into contact with people that are going to the store with them, or the gas station, or the pharmacy or whatever. But I think it's super low if you're doing that. There's studies that show about how long the virus can live on certain surfaces. It's important to remember that those are done in particular settings and under particular conditions, and whether you can extrapolate that data to being outside with the weather being a certain way that it is suspect. And I've heard the doctor that everybody likes nationally, Anthony Fauci, say that it's probably touching the Amazon box or the grocery stuff isn't as at risk as you may be led to believe by some of those studies. That said, it's always obviously good to be cautious. As tempting as it may be to go to a grandchild's birthday, or to, we got some big holidays coming up for folks with Easter and Mother's Day. It is going to be really important to stay the course and to hold the line and to not be physically together. Now, I would say personally, being outside, being in the driveway, being more than 6 feet apart, I think you're fine. I think that's much, much less risk than other situations where you would be physically together. So I think for us personally, it's going to be hard to do that with me known being positive, and I'm sure people in our neighborhood might be a little freaked out about it. But yeah, so I, in terms of the risk for older people doing the things, even older people that do tend to get sicker, I think if you're doing the right thing, you are at very low risk.
So no one's posting signs in your yard, unclean, stay away,
No,
pitchforks.
I put a giant, I joked, I'm going to put a giant sign, COVID positive, stay out.
I've got a question, got two questions here. One is, what's the best hand sanitizer to use with the limited product availability? But the heavier one deals with, do you have advice for older parents of an RN at St. Vincent's Hospital regarding precautions, sanitation stuff? He lives at home, so the question is for home-related issues, home-related measures to take.
Well, the first one, I'll have to get some clarification on the second one. Anything was, probably at least 60 to 70% alcohol in it, in the foam, is thought to be very effective for killing the virus. So the thing with infections is, for them to survive, they do have to live and propagate in certain environments. That's why some of the scary viruses, HIV, Ebola, back HIV in the 80s, I mean, in a way, they were hard to transmit. But anyway, when these viruses get outside of their desired element, I mean, they still have a tendency to die. And I don't have any more words of wisdom beyond what you can read, which is 70% plus alcohol, whatever hand sanitizer you use. Brand does not matter. And when washing your hands 20 minutes. I mean, before in the hospital, there's always been a push for more providers to wash their hands, but 3 seconds under a rinse was, sometimes the extent of it. And now washing with soap and water, 20 seconds, is thought to be very effective. And I don't have anything to add really beyond that. I'm not sure the question about a person that has a daughter at St. Vincent's that's an RN, if the daughter is living, was the question if they're living in the same household?
Yes,
what's the right?
They are. Yes.
Yeah, that's tricky. Ideally, it's just hard. I mean, I can tell you, it's really hard to live apart in your house. We've tried it to some extent. I sleep in a basement and use a different bathroom than the rest of my family members. I stay in this office a lot of times, but ideally is staying physically apart and washing things down that you would touch commonly. But if you have a separate bathroom, a separate room, is to use those to reduce the chance of getting the disease by touching someone that someone else touched that may be infectious. Being an RN at St. Vincent's is going to put her at more risk to get the disease. There's multiple studies that have shown that that healthcare workers are higher risk to get it. Now, that said, some of those studies were done early on in the situation, and I think as healthcare systems have moved more towards considering everyone potentially contagious and getting people working in the hospital protective equipment, and then assuming that anyone who comes in there is contagious and putting masks on them, which is called source control, will limit the likelihood of more the likelihood of healthcare providers getting infected with this. The hard thing is, though, it's really hard to put a time frame on this. So the question is, how long can all of these measures go on, and what is going to give us some assurance that we've turned the corner and that we start doing some things that get people back to some normalcy without putting us at risk just to go through this all over again, if we do it too early. So anyway, I don't know if that answered the question enough for the particulars of the folks living together, but I would be more comfortable now, assuming St. Vincent's has done the things that we've done at IU Health to really try to contain things at work and prevent cross-contamination and infectivity of healthcare workers than I was ago.
Yeah, Dave, this is Ray Anton. It's my son who's the RN at St. Vincent's, and he's in the ICU there, which was previously a cardiac ICU, but they have since moved that out of the building, and have now making use of the ICU resource as an overflow, they will eventually get COVID patients. There's no question about it. And
Right.
basically, we have our son shed his scrubs and everything and change clothes at work,
Yeah.
put him in a bag. When he gets home, he goes right into a bathroom right off the entry from the garage after he takes his shoes off out there. And those are in a bag also. And he goes right in and throws his clothes into the laundry room, goes to take a shower. All of his towels go right into the laundry and everything gets washed. So we're short of hosing him down with Clorox, but you know what I mean? It's, we're doing about
Yeah,
everything
that's
we can. But you know what I mean? Doing about everything we can. All surfaces get wiped often. My wife is on that like crazy, and we're doing what we think we can do. Obviously, I'm north of 70, and my wife in her
yeah.
early 60s, but nevertheless, we're kind of in the crosshairs of this thing in terms of at-risk age. So we're doing about
Right.
everything we can do on this thing. But I was just wondering if there's anything else you can think of that we may have forgotten to do.
No, well, not really. I mean, I didn't. I guess I forgot to mention I do the same. I was changing at work, different shoes. I had what they call a hot zone, a warm zone, and a cold zone for me personally. So I considered work the hot zone. At work, I would change out of my dirty scrubs into a pair of clean scrubs or clothes with different shoes, but still considered the fact that I had to do that somewhere at workish, even though that wasn't exposed directly to patients or other healthcare workers. And then when I would get home, I'd strip in the garage, take off my shoes, get in the shower, and then put on clean clothes. And then I keep all my dirty stuff in the trunk of my car. And when I've gone through this for a couple of weeks now, have been anyway, that I would, throw that all in the laundry with a bunch of bleach and soap and wash it. So what you're doing is fantastic. If you do that, and at work, they're the big national and international bodies that are trying to give healthcare workers an idea of what is considered safe in terms of their protective group, have been in conflict for some situations, and that it has caused consternation with healthcare people. But it seems like with the kind of protective gear that is available now, if it is worn properly and what they call doffed and on, which means put it on, take it off properly without contaminating yourself, that it would be unlikely for you to get it from a patient at work. I worry up until recently, the healthcare staff just was all together. And when we would talk a workstation or a computer module, whatever, we weren't assuming each other was infectious. And it has been a worry of mine that in the push that we consider the ER a mask always zone for anybody, whether you're a security guard, environmental services person, the nurses, whatever, and you should always have your mask on because you don't know if you have it and you don't want to give it to anybody. Now, again, I mean, it's an odd virus just in that you think like if you're not coughing a lot, you're not sneezing, you're not picking your nose because you got a mask on, even if you have it, you should be at very low risk to transmit it to anybody else. So I think if St. Vincent's is doing what I'm sure they're doing, it's a fantastic hospital system, and your son is taking extra precautions about his hot zone at work and cold zone at home, and you're doing all the other stuff with wiping things down. And again, I don't know if it's possible, but he sleeps in a different bedroom, uses a separate bathroom. It's probably good.
Yeah.
We've got several questions piling up here.
Thanks, Dave.
One deals with which is better, liquid or wipes for sanitizers. But the other one that you can be thinking about is dealing with conjunctivitis. And this comes from Skip. Do your patients that you see in ER, did you notice conjunctivitis, red eye, on initial presentation? Journal of Ophthalmology just started to notice in the literature.
Yeah, I've just seen that too. The first one, no, I don't. Again, I don't think this virus is hardy in that it can thrive outside of its host. So whether it's a wipe with bleach, it's bleach and alcohol, and the right kind of alcohol. And soap, I think all that'll kill it, and you'll be safe. It's hard to know everything to wipe down, and I can't tell you how much more conscientious and aware of things that I touch as I've become, but it's still tricky. But I think in terms of, I'm not a product expert, by the way, so I'm probably not the right one to ask about that. But from what I know, all of that's fine. I personally, and at work, those are the things we have at work. They're bleachish products, and they're alcohol-based products that are used to clean hands and wipe surfaces down. The ophthalmology question, yeah, it's interestingly, the doctor in China, I think, that had issues with it initially was an ophthalmologist. Not sure about that, but in terms of clinical manifestations, they are seeing the virus. Is thought is a upper and lower respiratory tract infectious virus, but they have found it in other body fluid, including tears, conjunctival, things in the eye. I have not personally seen anyone presented with conjunctivitis as their primary complaint that ended up testing positive. But yeah, I think it was even this morning that I read something that that does talk about that as yet another possible presenting symptom of the virus. That is, again, one of the challenges, is particularly when we're trying to determine who was at risk, separating them from other patients, having healthcare workers with appropriate stuff. We just found out that everybody, in a way, was at risk. Once it got spread in the community, and once we found out asymptomatic people could transmit it, even though it seems unlikely the way that it's most thought to transmit. But we wear, part of our personal protective equipment is eye covering, eye shields, not wanting to get the virus, particularly that it would settle in the recesses if it would be aerosolized, or what they call a large particle droplet. It gets sneezed on or coughed on, and gets in your eye, settles in the lower lid margin, and possibly that it gets in your system that way. So I think it's still a relatively uncommon way for the virus, the infection, to present, conjunctivitis, alone certainly, and even as a feature of someone with multiple symptoms. But yes, it is known to happen, to exist, to be possible.
Got a question here. It says, your thoughts if initial COVID-19 TX Zithromax oral and chloroquine oral Tamiflu in initial 48 hours, question mark. Does that make sense?
Are the three medicines being asked about, just so I understand this, are Tamiflu, azithromycin, and hydroxychloroquine?
Yeah. Are they effective within the first 48 hours?
Nobody knows. I know that so one at a time, Tamiflu is thought not to be effective at all, from what I understand it, which is the medicine that you can get for the flu, which, to be honest, it's touted as being useful by CDC, but we have a lot of academic people in my group that research things. When they look at studies that look at the effectiveness for Tamiflu for even influenza, its effect is very suspect, and the number you would need to treat to get any benefit versus the number that could potentially harm, it's not a good ratio. But we don't have a lot of medicines for influenza either, and so it is commonly used, but I don't know of that being effective at all for the this strand of coronavirus. The azithromycin, the tricky thing with that now is there's no reason to use any of this empirically.
Mm-hmm.
If you do not have symptoms, you should not be using it. You should not be consuming it and hoarding it, because there are people that may benefit down the road from it. And we may find that there's benefit and it's not available, which, again, when we have an IV azithromycin shortage at Methodist. But it is, so one of the challenges people come in with respiratory symptoms is community-acquired pneumonia is still out there due to the common bacterial agents that cause that. And that is a medicine that is very effective for that. So if someone comes in with cough and fever and they've got an infiltrate on their x-ray, it's a challenge to know, is this COVID or is this what we consider a typical pneumonia, bacterial pneumonia, which, and then do you put them on azithromycin? Stopped working last Saturday. Up until then, the answer is I would put you on azithromycin. I would also tell you that you may be COVID positive, assuming you're younger, healthier, not that sick, and don't need to be hospitalized and aren't a healthcare worker. You would not be eligible for a test for COVID. And so you would go into a self-quarantine for COVID, but at the same time be treated with azithromycin. Azithromycin, in terms of its effectiveness on known COVID pneumonia patients, there's some, by the way that it works, does it have some kind of antiviral or anti-inflammatory activity? It might. And so it isn't uncommon that that gets added to the regimen of tested positive COVID patients that come in and are admitted. I think, though, that there are some other tests that help us distinguish viral from bacterial pneumonia. And if at the end of the day it really looks more like viral pneumonia, the azithromycin will be stopped. Now that all these are moving targets as healthcare systems and hospitals, treat patients with no reliable evidence-based historical precedent. But anyway, that's azithromycin. Hydroxychloroquine, it also is, in our institution, it has now defined indications for usage, and it basically is for people that have COVID positive pneumonia and who are sick. It is not being given to folks that are discharged because they aren't that ill, and certainly not given for people just because they were exposed with no symptoms. And I don't know how much I know hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine are getting a lot of attention. I'm happy to talk about that more as much as I know about it. But anyway, so I don't know if that was.
Got another question here for you, and this deals with you and your peers. How can we be helping you? What kind of support would be meaningful to you, your family, and then the second part of that is the broader first responder groupings of people. Your thoughts?
I know people really want to be helpful, and the easy low-hanging fruit answers are just to keep doing what you're doing, because it has worked. I can't tell you how, actually the ER, I told you before, we operated at above capacity. The actual total volumes in the ER have been low. It's a concern financially for hospitals, just because, right now we aren't slammed with COVID patients, even though the percentage of people coming in are sicker with COVID. But the physical distancing is working, and, just trying to be patient. And that is to me the thing to do to help the healthcare workers and the frontline people. The other frontline people are the people at grocery stores and restaurants, and it is physically, trying to stay 6 feet apart from those folks as best as you can. In terms of making things, the masks that you can make, I think, will be helpful, depending on how widespread the problem becomes, and depending on what the manufacturers can pump out. But those masks serve a purpose. They prevent a person from potentially who has it from basically, getting their stuff on places that it's not supposed to go. In terms of, obviously, just emotional support and spiritual support, and understanding that it's stressful for people that are doing this. It's important to get away from the news every once in a while and just try to enjoy the things that you enjoy. I think it's important for healthcare workers. The economic impact is probably, I'm confident it will be, affect more people than actually are seriously affected from a healthcare perspective. So people may get it and get over it. There may be maybe hundreds of millions of people that happens to, but economically, it's going to be just brutal and devastating for people. And I'm hopeful that we reach out to folks that I don't know how to do it. We've thought of, you adopt a family or a person or whatever you can do to help people that are going to be, so much of our country lives paycheck to paycheck, and they don't have savings, they don't have reserves, and they still have bills, and now they don't got anything coming in. I mean, those people, I know people haven't lost sight of that, but I'm really, concerned about that too. So, anyway, I guess that's my thoughts. I mean, people that need food, people that need.
So the Grace Care Center is involved in the food component as well as microloans and many other things that many of us aren't aware of. We'll get more of that next week. Let's see, have I missed anyone's question there? Feel free to raise your hand. Let us know if you've got a question that Dave could provide input on. One of the benefits of this for me personally is to hear get firsthand information from someone that, number one, you can trust their input. They're, they've got no horse in the race, so to speak. They're not trying to support a political position. Dave's just out there trying to keep well people well and sick people, turning them back into being well, and in the process reflect the love of Christ in the process. So this is one reason why this was important to me, and I hope it's coming across the same for you. Can anyone else think of any questions?
Chuck, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Yes, I'm considered in the high-risk category with an underlying condition. I have an injured left knee, and I have an MRI scheduled on April 13th at Ortho Indy. You've been sheltered in place here for almost 3 weeks now. Would you recommend, Dr. Dave, that I postpone that, move that back to avoid the possibility of getting exposure?
Yeah, I'm sorry that you're in that spot. I think you do represent a large group of people that have quasi-elective healthcare issues to sort out. I feel more comfortable now with you getting it than I would have a few weeks ago, just because I think healthcare systems and hospitals are really trying to maximize their ability to avoid cross-contamination and infectivity within the walls of a hospital. They are trying to separate service lines and even things like CT scanners, like they're trying to put all the orthopedic patients even in a separate hospital, not a separate unit of the hospital, or folks that need cardiac care in a separate hospital than others. And even with imaging, for us, we would have a CT scanner that was more for COVID suspicious patients, and one that was for non-COVID suspicious patients. But so the challenge though is, again, you don't know for sure who's walking around without obviously COVID suspicious infections or is asymptomatic and could potentially contaminate it. Now, I'm sure that they are wiping down, even in the non-COVID suspicious MRIs and imaging modalities and units, they are wiping it down. I would say if you could put it off a little bit longer, that's probably ideal, but it may not be necessary. So, I guess here's the other consideration. Say that it shows you have a problem that would be amenable to surgery. Are you going to even be able to get your surgery done anytime soon with this pause of elective surgery? And if the answer would be, man, we don't know, or there's a decent chance I couldn't do your elective surgery until June, even if you have a meniscal tear, whatever, something that needs surgery to fix, I think it would be prudent to wait to get your imaging study until the results of that imaging study could be acted on.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Dave, start to land this here in a minute. And first of all, again, I want to be redundant in thanking you You're an awesome guy. You've been here for my family. And so we're just very grateful. And we're very much appreciative for you as a representative of everyone that's out there, whether it's the people that are cleaning the rooms after the mess has been made, or the guy that's in there providing the direction on how to mess up the room. That would be you. You know, we appreciate you. We love you. And there's just not enough we can say about that. A couple of suggestions for people. Number one, talk to one another, get on the phone. We're physically isolated, but whenever I have a conversation by phone, or in this context with technology, it always reaps big rewards for me, and the people on the other end seem to appreciate having a few minutes on the phone with someone. And the other thing, like Margot and John Jurgensen just did, get out and take a walk. Make sure we continue to get a little bit of exercise in this, because I can tell you from being locked inside, I'm losing my legs quickly, and something that I have to work on. So just want to pass those words of wisdom on to you for whatever they're worth. At this time, I'm going to ask Don if he would wrap it up in prayer. You've heard a lot there, Don.
Hey,
So-
Chuck,
Yes.
I just want to say, hey, thanks for inviting me. I've, so much appreciated you, Chuck. I love hearing your stories and reading your blog. You're showing us the way, showing us how to do it.
Thank you. Thank you.